सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen though.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
So far, 20 states have come up with their budgets for the financial year 2023-24. Now, our friends at NIPFP have done a lot of work in analyzing these budgets, and they have looked at it from the point of view of what has been promised, what was delivered, and what are they promising for the next year ahead. So this is what this episode of Macro Sutra is going to focus on. Is it that states are overpromising and underspending? And what the budgets tell us about their relative fiscal health. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, economy editor at ThePrint, and this is Radhika Pandey, senior fellow at NIPFP, and who has also done quite a lot of these calculations and who can lend a lot of insight for us. Thank you so much, Radhika, for coming.
Thank you, Sharad.
So now, Radhika, let's start at the basic, which is that broadly speaking, how accurate are the states when they present a budget? So when it comes to the center, it's been reasonably accurate in terms of what they say in the budget estimates, then what the revised estimates show halfway through, and what the actuals have been. The accuracy has been kind of good.
Yeah.
Is this the case with the states?
No, actually, it is not the case with the states. Particularly, there are wide state level variations. Particularly, some of the states, for example, Bihar, Assam, these are the states where there is wide variation between the budget estimates, revised estimates, and actual. So, in fact, the CAG, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, has also flagged these concerns that there are wide variations in the what the states commit at the time of their budget, which is the budgeted estimate, what comes out as a revised estimate, which is actually should be closer to actuals, because revised estimates come at a time when already the states have 9 to 10 months of data. So the revised estimates should be closer to actuals, just like they are in case of the central government. But here we see in some of the states, revised estimates are way out of sync with what actual estimates tell us. So there is a problem with some of the states on the way they project their estimates for fiscal deficit, for expenditure. So what they try to do is they overestimate, and then ultimately they are not able to spend so much. And then what we find is that actually the actuals, which are the final audited numbers, they are pretty close to the budgeted one. So that lends concerns on the credibility of the revised estimates. So in fact, it's like for some of the states like an A-shaped pattern, where you have a low budget estimate and then very high revenue revised estimates, and then finally the actuals are also quite low. So states tend to underspend in actual terms as compared to what they show in the revised estimate. So those are the concerns, and some of the other concerns are that states also tend to underreport. For example, for West Bengal, they have underreported their deficit numbers, not just for 1 year, but consistently for 4 to 5 years. So that's another manifestation of problem. And the second is the wide variation between the budget and the revised estimate.
So now there are two questions here. One is this a problem that is endemic across states, or are there a few that are repeat offenders and others do better?
Yeah, there are a few which are the states, they are repeatedly doing these kind of, they are facing these kind of issues where the revised estimates are much higher, and they're completely out of sync with the budget and the actual. So if we look at some specific examples, for example, let's say capital expenditure. Okay, so if we want to talk about capital expenditure, which is one of the mainstay of economic economic growth in states. So what we see is that, for example, say Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh had budgeted 31,000 crore.
Okay.
In the just concluded financial year, which is 22-23, the financial year ending 31st March.
So in last year's budget, they basically said 32,000 crore.
32,000 crore.
Right.
Now, when this year's budget came, which will show us the revised estimates for 22-23, the revised estimates show capital expenditure at 16,000 crore, which is almost half of what they had budgeted.
Right.
And then when we have the budgeted estimate, that is what they are promising to do in the current financial year, they have again made it 31,000 crore. So this is the kind of issues that we see in a number of states where they, especially for capital expenditure, they tend to promise much more than they are not able to achieve in the revised estimates. And then for the next year also, they tend to again scale up the estimate again in the budgeted estimate. So that we have seen in a number of examples. Now there's another set of states where they have increased from budgeted to revised estimate. For example, Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is one of the states that has committed the maximum out of all the states in capex.
Right.
So in 22-23, they budgeted 1,23,000 crore. In the revised estimate, that went up to 1,26,000 crore.
Right.
But now when we see the actual data, we get the actual data from CAG's monthly economic report. They have not even spent half of that. So those are the two kind of problems. So one problem is that states tend to overcommit. They commit a large amount, but they are able to achieve in the revised estimate, they slash it by almost half, which is an example like Andhra Pradesh. There are other set of states where they increase in the revised estimates more than the budget. But when you look at the actual, because by now we know we have data till February, they have spent only 50%. Maharashtra is also one state that has committed a large chunk towards capex, but till now it has achieved just 40%. So there is a problem of over commitment and underspending across the states in various degrees.
Right. So from what I can understand, the problem is of two natures.
Yeah.
One is where in the revised estimates, they increase what they had said in the budget.
Yeah.
And then the actuals is less than that.
Yes.
Or the other way is that they slash what they promised in the... So it's either an A shape or it's a V shape.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I see.
So that is those are the two kinds of problem that we experience when we look at the budgeted estimates.
So just looking at the fiscal health of a state, which of them do you think is the better approach? I know that ideally they should be accurate throughout.
Yeah.
But which would you say is more would be better? Should they promise more and then deliver less, or should they be more realistic and say that no, we actually aren't going to be able to spend?
See, some level of deviation is permissible. But for example, states like Bihar and Assam, if you look at again, we are talking about say fiscal deficit.
Right.
Okay? So Bihar had committed a fiscal deficit of 3.2%. And we know that fiscal deficit is something that comes from Finance Commission's roadmap. Finance Commission gives a roadmap of fiscal trajectory for the 5-year award period.
Right.
So according to the Finance Commission's recommendations for 2023 onwards till 2026, states should have a fiscal deficit of 3%. And another 0.5% is permitted if they do power sector reforms, if they try to reduce the losses of the T&D losses, if they try to cut the losses of the distribution companies, then they are permissible another 0.5% of borrowing.
Right.
But when we look at what they are committing, for example, Bihar is committing within the Finance Commission roadmap, the targets, but the revised estimate is 8.8%. So it is too much out of sync. If it is 3.5 and if they say 4 or 4.2, it is still okay. If they say, for example, Himachal Pradesh 5 to 5.5, it's still okay. But particularly from the point of view of fiscal prudence or fiscal discipline, states like Bihar and Assam stand out because they promise something which is within the range, within the permissible range, but their revised estimates go way out of sync with the budgeted estimate. And then again, actuals back to closer to what they had promised. So it's like an A-shape. So that, again, as I said earlier, that there are problems, particularly for some states, regarding the credibility of their revised estimates numbers.
So then can we say that since they have also now given us the budget plan for the upcoming, for actually now the current financial year, can we say that for these states, since their actuals resemble the budgets, does that give us some indication that what the actuals might turn out? Now they've budgeted this much for 2023-24.
Yes.
It'll likely be this number. Forget about what they say in the revised estimate.
Absolutely. So it's better to look at the actuals we have for 2021-22. For example, now with the budget for FY24, which is 2023 to 24, we have the budget estimate for this year, we have the revised estimate for 2022-23, and we have the actuals for 2021-22.
Right.
So to get an assessment about the credibility of their commitments, it's always better to have a comparison of budgeted estimate, revised and actual, which comes from 2021-22. So it's that is something, that is an exercise which is worth doing for all the states to get an assessment of where do their revised estimates stand. Now, coming to the other question that you raised, that which combination is less problematic or more problematic. For example, Uttar Pradesh we talked about, where they have spent as of now only 50%. Of their capex. So, but that is part of a bigger problem, and that is something also that we need to take into cognizance, because now what is happening is that the entire institutional framework of fiscal reporting is changing. The central government is pushing towards a lot of fiscal transparency. We have something called SNA dashboard, which is the single national account treasury dashboard, where the states have to account, they have to show that they have actually spent the first tranche of grants. Then only they are going to get the second tranche of grants. So that institutionally, the direction of funding has become much more transparent, and states will take some time to settle it into the new arrangement. So that is something also that will take some time to sink in, to adjust to the new institutional framework that has been set up by the central government. The other is that the central government has put a lot of checks on budget borrowings. Like the central government themselves also, they have done away with off-budget borrowing. The extra budgetary resources used to be one item till 2020-21.
Now it's all being reported.
It's all being reported. It's on budget rather than off budget. The same things are being expected out of states also. They have been given a time frame to report all of their off-budget borrowing as part of the borrowing that go into the deficit computation. So all these changes will take some time to be adjusted in the state's fiscal health. And therefore, those are also some of the things that result in underspending by states. But again, if we just look at even in this 50% which UP has spent, it is much more than what UP has been spending over the last few years. So that is another metric that one needs to see and needs to consider this in this entire ecosystem of new institutional framework.
Right. So now this might be a little bit of an out of syllabus question, but what exactly happens to a state if it does not conform with these rules? So the center can go on recommending things and say that the state should do this, state should do that. But what happens if the state doesn't? Is there some sort of punishment? Is there some sort of way that they can be made to conform?
So again, there are two parts to this. Now, if we look at the FRBM, which is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, Now, even the central government has not been able to adhere to some of the rules which are prescribed under the FRBM.
Right.
One of which is that the central government has to prescribe a medium-term fiscal framework,
Yes.
which is to provide intermittent targets, so which is not provided, and we have something, the 4.5% deficit target for FY26. In between, we do not have.
Yeah.
So, the central government has given this rationale that because there is a lot of uncertainty, they cannot give these targets. Same is the case for states. While the legislated mandate is 3% of FRBM, they are not able to achieve that target. And as of now, there is no such punishment as such for deviating from the fiscal deficit targets. But central government is trying to tighten its grip in some way or the other. Right. One way is that we know now the central government gives 50-year interest-free loans for capex, for enhancing capex in states. And there also a lot of conditionalities are attached that if you take this loan, you have to use it within 1 year on capex for these very activities. If you deviate 0.5%, it has to be used for, it has to be tied with power sector reform. And this time around, in fact, the central government has prescribed capex targets for each state.
Right.
Yeah. So if they meet those targets, then only the 50-year interest-free loans will be given. Now, it's debatable how much of this gripping over the state's finances is good or not, but that is something that we are seeing in the recent few months to kind of incentivize states also to prioritize their spending towards capex and towards expenditure, which is more welfare oriented.
So it's more of a carrot approach than a stick approach.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we've been talking about capex quite a lot, and we have a question from the audience which is linked to that, which is, do you think less spending by states on infrastructure is the reason why the private sector is not spending and participating in these kinds of projects?
Partly, as I said, why states are not spending is that one is they are underspending because of the institutional changes that we talked about. The other is that their revenues have become more uncertain and volatile in the coming months. One, because of changes in oil prices, because we know that VAT from petrol is one of the major sources of revenue. So that also lends some kind of disincentive to spend more.
Right.
But when we come to private sector, it's not just entirely driven by what the states are doing. They have their own set of metrics to judge whether they want to enhance their investments or not, which is mainly looking at capacity utilization. So if their capacity utilization has attained 75%, they tend to invest more.
Right,
so that is one thing. And if we look at the recent few months, we have seen that some states have been changing their policies to make it more favorable for private sector investments. For example, again, Uttar Pradesh is one example where a lot of MOUs have been signed with private sector players, particularly in the field of civil aviation, airports. So we should see more inflow of private sector investment, which is not just a function of whether states are spending or not, but it's a function of their own judgment about capacity utilization and also the policy environment, whether, what is the extent of red tapeism, what are the delays, whether they are going, what's the bureaucratic delay and all. So if the policy framework becomes much more congenial for private investment, we should see more inflow of private investments in some of the states. And we are seeing that. Some early signals are visible.
Right. And now we've talked about spending, but coming to the revenue side, do you see that this discrepancy is there as well, where the states are saying that we will get this much revenue in their budget, but then the revised estimates is different and the actuals are even more different?
Yes. So firstly, on an aggregate basis, if we just look at the 20 states, the first fact that we have seen is that this time for 23-24, the growth in revenue is budgeted at a much slower pace as compared to 2022-23. It's almost half of what growth was seen in FY23. So this is in sync with what we have seen in the central government budget also. There also we have seen that the revenue estimates have been much more conservative this time. So overall, if we look at the on an aggregate basis, if we look at the states' budgets also, there also we see that the revenue estimates have been quite conservative. The pace of growth has slowed down.
Right.
Another reason is also now that the GST compensation has been discontinued.
Yes.
The central government used to pay GST compensation, that has been discontinued. So now various states have actually set up something called a GST enhancement project to see how they should enhance their own tax revenue. Because now they have to, we need to see a structural shift happening toward something which is called the own tax revenue as a share of the size of the economy, which is OTR, own tax revenue, as a share of the gross state domestic product.
Yeah.
So if we look at the budget statements of these states, we are seeing that there have been some initiatives towards enhancing the own tax revenue of states. Now, some of these may not be in the correct direction. Some of these may be a very rushed, hurried decisions, but yes, they have taken. For example, one notable example is Himachal Pradesh, whose own tax revenue is, one of the lowest amongst all the 20 states. On an average basis, own tax revenue as a share of the size of Himachal Pradesh's economy is one of the lowest. It's around 5.5%, whereas the average of all states is 7%. So what they have done is they have imposed something called a milk cess of rupees 10 on liquor bottle. Rupees 10 on a liquor bottle. So many states have introduced various measures towards enhancing revenue. Particularly, that is what we are seeing as a common theme, so that the states are able to increase their own tax revenues.
Yeah.
In the light of the fact that the grants from central government has slowed down, the GST compensation has been discontinued. So that is one structural pattern that we are seeing across the states' budgets.
And so now we've talked about expenditure, we've talked about revenue, we've talked about the fiscal deficit as well. Coming to growth.
Right.
In the budgets, usually the center also projects growth for the next year, and so do the states. So what do these projections tell us? Are they at least realistic?
Again, there are wide variations because, as you rightly pointed out, this growth number is very critical for the budget calculations, because it's the denominator, it's the base on the basis of which the fiscal deficit target is fixed.
Right.
On the basis of tax collections, targets are fixed. So this growth projection, that is how much in 23-24 the economy will grow over 2022-23, it's very critical. And again, we see wide variations among states. The central government's projection is 10.5, but there are a number of states, out of these 20 states, there are a number of states who have projected their growth to be much more than 10.5%.
Much more than what even like the All India growth rate is?
All India growth, which is 10.5%. Given at a time when we are seeing now, yesterday World Bank scaled down the GDP growth projection, ADB has scaled down. At this time of slowing growth, monetary policy tightening, some states, for example, UP has projected a growth of 19% in GSDP.
Wow.
Now that seems to be over-ambitious, but at a time when the economy's growth is projected to be 10.5%, we generally see central government's targets to be moderate. They are realistic, whereas for some of the states they have projected a very high growth rate, and we can understand the intention behind those also, because if you have a very large denominator, you tend to look good on fiscal deficit numbers, because your big denominator will act as a cushion, even if in absolute terms you deviate from your fiscal target. But the point is that these numbers are they are hard to believe at a time when the growth is slowing down. In a state like Uttar Pradesh, expecting a 19% growth rate, and in fact not even 19% in some of the other states, many states have projected more than 15% growth rate.
Wow.
So that needs to be seen, because if your edifice, if your denominator is ambitious, it is unrealistic, then your entire fiscal calculations also break down.
Right. So now we've had a number of questions that relate to the old pension scheme versus new pension scheme debate. And we've talked about this before, and it's in itself a topic for a full episode. So, I mean, I will ask the questions, but we can't really spend all that much time on it. So the question is, so one of them is that West Bengal is one of the major states which decided to go for OPS in spite of the introduction of NPS. What, according to you, is the reason that its state finances, despite this, has been able to survive? And the follow-on question from somebody else is that does the debate of OPS versus NPS, does it purely depend on the state revenues and future revenue estimates and the life expectancies of the employees?
Yes, so particularly West Bengal, if you look at the budgets, it may not be correct to say that the budget is safe, because if we look at if we dig deeper into the numbers, what we see is that they have always been underspending on capital expenditure, which is one of the we see that which is one of the main agenda for economic development. So they have always underspent on the state has always underspent on capital spending, and that is something which the CAG has also pointed out. And because they are spending more of their revenues on something called the committed expenditure.
Right.
Now, committed expenditure has three main components: salaries, pensions, and interest payments. So, for West Bengal, these three items together account for 62% of the revenues.
Wow.
So 62% of the revenues are going towards just salaries, pensions, and interest. That leaves very little for welfare-oriented activities. That leaves very little for capital spending. That is point number one. And second point is that even within this, if we look at the difference between budget estimate and revised estimates, the pension expenditure has been overshot by 11% between 2022 to 23. So the fact that they did not move to NPS is reflected in the finances of the states, is reflected in the fact that they are underspending on capex. Firstly, they are keeping also a small amount, allocating small amount, and even that is not being spent. So the priorities of the states get reflected in the finances of the states as well.
So now another question that we have from the audience is that the allocation of central grants, which is based on the recommendations of the Finance Commission, they're saying that while there's no fixed formula, the poorer states actually end up getting a larger share of grants. So what the question is that has this become more like supporting the needy, or rather has supporting the needy become rewarding the underperformers?
Okay, so firstly, there are some fixed criteria. It's not that there are no criteria. If we look at each Finance Commission report, there are some criteria for the devolution of revenues, which is one of the main criteria is income distance, which is what is the distance of a particular state from the richest state. So in that criteria, on the basis of that criteria, yes, the poorer states tend to get more, but there are other criteria also like population, that is those states who are able to control population get rewarded. Tax effort is one of the criteria. Forest cover is one of the criteria. So there are several criteria to assess the devolution. But yes, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh tend to get more out of the total shareable pool of taxes. But again, you see there is a vast difference between Uttar Pradesh and Bihar if you look at their trajectory. So while they both get more, if we look at the quality of fiscal finances of these two states, they are vastly different. Because if we look at Bihar, they have actually slashed their capital expenditure, not only between the budget estimate and revised estimate of the concluded financial year, but even for the next financial year, they have cut the capital expenditure by 26%.
Wow.
So that means that their priorities lie somewhere else, whereas in Uttar Pradesh, they have increased it. So just by looking at the devolution formula and the fact that they are getting more should not stop us from digging deeper into the finances and the budget papers and how much they have spent, and that gives us valuable insights upon how their trajectory has actually varied. Earlier, it was correct, okay, to club them into one category, but now it is not. In fact, UP has done better in terms of capital spending, in terms of attracting private investment.
So these are actually really valuable insights that NIPFP, Radhika and her team have actually given us. What we can see is that states are indeed actually overpromising and then underspending after that. And on the revenue side as well, a lot of times the promises and what their targets aren't met. On growth, there are several states that are promising more than 15% growth. Uttar Pradesh is saying 19%. Now, in the current environment that we're in, this seems kind of unrealistic. And this is a big problem because a lot of the financial metrics are pegged to the growth rates of these states. So that's all we have for you on this episode. But before you go, I have an appeal for you, our dear viewers. Now, we at The Print, we really pride ourselves on the kind of stories we do. They are non-partisan, they're in-depth, they're well-researched. And a lot of the stories we do are ground reports where we send our reporters to places and to do stories that other agencies don't do. But now this takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of mental time. It takes a lot of money. It's this last element that I make an appeal to you. Please subscribe to The Print. It's what enables us to do the kind of work that we're doing. And apart from that, it gives you a lot of benefits. You get priority passes to the webinars that we do and the on-ground functions that we do. It gives you the opportunity to write for us in the Your Turn section and give us your view on the news of the day. And it also gives you access to exclusive newsletters written by our editors, including me, including all of our other editors here. And they come straight to you once you subscribe. So please do subscribe. The link is in the description of this video. And thank you so much for watching.